Hi there, BookTube. It's Ros here with a tag. I've got loads of tags, kind of that I'm behind with at the moment. So I'm trying to do like a couple of weeks to catch myself up, maybe even 3. And this one is a somewhat autobiographical tag that was the original was by Mark of Booktime with Elvis, and I was tagged by Alan of Big Hard Books and Classics. Now, I'm trying to do my tagging up front on the tags at the moment, but because I've been doing like a whole like sequence of tags, I'm sort of slightly losing grip on who I should tag. So what I will say with this one is, if you haven't, and I'm behind, a lot of people have already done it. So if you haven't already done it, please, and you'd like to, consider yourself tagged and do it. Okay. So longish prompts. So I'm going to read them off my tablet. And prompt number 1: what was the number 1 best-selling book, fiction and or non-fiction, on the day you were born, and have you read them? So I was born in January of 1964, and I wanted to find which was the best-selling book in the UK that month, but couldn't seem to find it. So I've had to go with what was the New York Times do a sort of bestseller list that is archived, and so I had to go for that. And there were, interestingly, actually, in the year 1964, there were only 4 books that held the number 1 bestseller spot for fiction in that year, um, and of those 4, I've read 3, which kind of quite surprised me, really. So the one that I haven't read was The Rector of Justin by Louis Alkinloss. Alkincloss. No idea what that is. But the other 3 were The Group by Mary McCarthy, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold by John le Carre, and Herzog by Saul Bellow. And I've read all 3 of those. And of the 3, I have to say The Spy Who Came In From the Cold is definitely my favourite. I think possibly The Group was the one that was number 1 in January. Anyway, prompt number 2: what are some books, series or standalone, that immediately spring to mind when you think of your childhood? I was a great reader as a child, and there's like loads that immediately spring to mind. Without having kind of prepared this, let's think. Louisa Alcott and Lauren Goose Wilder from America. Quintessentially British people like E. Nesbit and Frances Hodgson Burnett. Tove Jansson, Finnish writer of the Movement 12 books. Oh, I love those. Rudyard Kipling, terribly British again, but often writing about India, which I loved. Arthur Ransom, Swallows and Amazons. C.S. Lewis, yeah. Oh, yes. Alan Garner, a little bit older, a little bit more edgy, with lots of British folklore in them. Oh, so many. I could. Oh, and there's things from when I was littler. I suppose like Beatrix Potter. Yeah, there I should remember. That I was a little reader too. But you kind of, it's the things that you read, sort of around, I don't know, between the ages of about 8 and 12, that really stick in your mind forever, aren't they? Don't they? Anyway, next prompt: school days. School days are the best days of your life, apparently. Are they? No. Um, uh, Definitely not for me, I'd say. But there, you were forced to read some books that you maybe wouldn't have chosen for yourself. Okay, which did you enjoy? Well, nobody had to force me to read anything. I was an English teacher's dream. I lapped up everything they gave me, so I honestly couldn't name a book that I was forced to read at school and didn't enjoy. No, really can't. Ooh, next one. This is: were you independent or part of a pack at school? That's an interesting question. Did you join in the reading fads of the day or do your own thing? I had friends. Yeah, but I wouldn't say that I was ever part of a pack at school. No, definitely not. I wasn't in the sort of the in crowd. I had, a few good friends, including readers. Did I join in the reading fads of the day? Well, I'm not sure we had reading fads in the same way when I was at school. I mean, there were books that lots of people read and enjoyed, and new things came out, and that you read. But it's not like like when my children were at school. It was like the days of like Harry Potter or the Hunger Games, or things would come out and like everybody would read them. Well, it wasn't like that back in the end of the 60s, in the 70s, really. Don't think. Question number 5. As you moved into your turbulent teens, can you remember your first experience encountering sex in a book? Shakespeare, obviously. Yeah. And the poetry of John Donne or Andrew Marvell. Yeah. Tessa the D'Urbervilles, Thomas Hardy, Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte. Yeah. Explicit sex. I remember one of my brother's wives. I'm the youngest in my family, so you have to imagine that they were like, when I was in my early teens, they were in their sort of mid-20s, I suppose. And I remember one of them gave me a copy of Erica Jong's Fear of Flying, with the famous zipless fuck in it. I think she thought I needed to lighten up a bit, and yeah, she was from the generation where it was seen as terribly important to be sexually sort of liberated. Yeah, and really, she didn't know what I was getting up to. There we go. Prompt number 6. What are some of the first kinds of non-fiction you encountered? Now, that's an interesting question. When I was little, there was a series of books called Ladybirds. I think they still exist. And they used to do like lovely little, almost like small-sized picture books with um stories, or with the stories that I didn't particularly like, because they were sort of tended to be a bit, I don't know, almost dumbed down versions of things. But they did non-fiction that was very kind of digestible for a child. The other thing that we had in my house was a brilliant children's encyclopedia, something you wouldn't have now. It's interesting because reading a children's encyclopedia, you go through and you jump from thing to thing, or work through things. It's different experience from jumping around the internet to find things out. Not necessarily better or worse, just different. And atlases, yeah, lots of atlases and yeah, maps in my house. And yeah, so that was a kind of non-fiction that I really loved as a child and adopted. I'd pore over an atlas, or we've got an atlas of world history. Oh, joy. There we go. Question number 7. Whose bookshelf was more fun to raid, mum's or dad's? Okay, well, my parents didn't really have separate bookshelves, but there were lots of books in the house. I was probably never entirely sure whose books were whose. And they were both readers. I suppose the person who read with me and whose book tastes I perhaps was introduced to most was my mother. I can remember reading Elizabeth Goudge books with her. Someone, what was it, Sarah of Hardcover Hearts was talking about reading Elizabeth Goudge the other day on BookTube, and it was like, this sort of little light bulb went ping, remembering reading those with my mother. Historical fiction, things like Jean Plaidy, Mary Renault, yeah, were things that I enjoyed with her. But in retrospect, I think I picked up my love of crime fiction, detective fiction, from my father. And the other thing that he had a lot of kind of, he was a geneticist, but he had a lot of kind of associated scientific interests, I suppose. And so you get interesting books in the house of his that I would kind of look through and maybe look at the pictures and a bit of the text, but not read all of. Like Jane Goodall's book. What's it called? In the Shadow of Man, about studying the chimpanzees at Gombe. I remember that one. And or like The Naked Ape, Desmond Morris, that sort of thing. So yeah, I rated both their shelves, I suppose, so far as I knew whose was whose. Um, how diverse is your library is the next question. And for the purposes of this question, Mark has provided a kind of like a list of different genres. There's 35 categories on that list. I think that I have books from 33 of those 35. So you want to know which of the two that I don't have, don't you? I don't think I currently have any books that would fall into the business law and finance category, although I have had law books about housing law in the past and actually I've probably got some disability and children's rights law in the, yeah, but not a book, copies of legislation or codes of practice. The other one I don't have is any computing or internet books, although again I have had those in the past. Dummy's Guide to Windows and so on. But now, of course, you don't use a book, do you? You just Google it, don't you? So, but yeah. So yes, diverse, I suppose, is the answer. Interesting interpretation of diverse too. Question number 9 is, what types of books do you find difficult to discuss? None. I can rabbit on about anything, as you know, if you watch this channel regularly. So yeah, none. Question number 10. In what way do your life experiences and emotions shape your choice of reading? Well, of course, our life experiences and emotions shape our choice of reading. I wouldn't say in a very I'm not a mood reader. I discovered that when I did the moody reader tag. But I mean, my family kind of set my love of reading early. My life experience of education prepared me well for the kind of reading that I like to do now, I suppose. There's some reading where it's good to have that a range of context, I suppose, in cultural, political, historical, scientific, and I guess I got enough of that for that to influence what I read. It's a difficult question to answer that. In a way, I mean, it's a two-way process. I would say that my reading has influenced my life experiences and emotions as much as my life experiences and emotions shape my reading. Can I get away with that as an answer? I hope so. Question number 11. In the same way as our taste for food changes, so perhaps does our taste in books. Would you say your own reading tastes have evolved over the decades? Yes. Yes. If I think back to young Roz, I always enjoyed books that were rich, interesting, challenging, so that hasn't changed. But I would say I was a much more conventional reader when I was young. I wanted to read, the good books as opposed to forming my own view of what were the good books. Yeah, and I've probably become more and more interested in more experimental forms of fiction as the decades have passed. I also think that I I kind of went off reading nonfiction as a result of reading a lot of it when I was a student and so on, and that I've really come back to nonfiction later in life with more enthusiasm. I read more regularly. Read nonfiction. I never stopped completely, but I read it more regularly now. And the other thing that's changed is I loved poetry when I was studying it at school, and it was something I was really enthusiastic about. And then for reasons that escape me, I kind of stopped reading poetry for a big chunk of my adult life. Barely read any at all. And that is something that I came back to in my 40s, I suppose. And I now, I'll read one or two collections of poetry every month. It's a significant chunk of my reading. So yes, it has changed over the decades. Good question, Mark. Question number 12. Unfortunately, we all feel down at certain times. Have you got a go-to book to raise you back up? No, because I would say any book. Reading is definitely something I do if I'm down, but it doesn't have to be any specific book. Number 13. If you have to choose one book or author to represent each decade of your life, who or what would they be? The book should be ones that you read in that decade, not necessarily published in that decade. Excellent. Now, this I did prepare for, and it's really hard. How do you pick one book for a decade, or an author for a decade? But, so, 0 to 10, I'm going to pick The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling. And I will pick that because this copy belonged to my mother. And I suppose it symbolises the fact that it, like a lot of my reading, 0 to 10, was shaped by my parents, my older brothers and sisters, things that people gave me. And so hence reading a book that was a reading experience that was inherited, as it were. She was given this for Christmas in 1929, so when she was 10. It's on the front, swastika, and of course that was a perfectly acceptable thing to put on the front of a book in 1929, because what it suggested was Hindu culture, as opposed to what it was going to come to suggest 10 years later. That's an interesting thing. Okay, my teens. Again, really hard to choose, but the book I've chosen is my very, very battered copy of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, because I think this symbolises that kind of reading of 19th century sort of novels and so on that I did a lot of in my early teens. And the batteredness of this book indicates how rewarding and special that was for me, and how many rereadings I did. My 20s, now that's hard, but and so many things I could have chosen, but what I went for in the end was Rosamund Lehmann, Invitation to the Waltz. And I picked this because, for two reasons. One is because it's a Virago modern classic, and I think in my 20s, my late teens and 20s, that's when I discovered feminism, and wanting to read more books by women, and books from the past by women, as well as contemporary books by women. So that's very appropriate. But also, Invitation to the Waltz is when I read A Dusty Answer and Invitation to the Waltz by Rosamund Lehmann, I felt like she spoke to me of how it feels to be sort of a young woman age, in their late teens or early 20s. And even though she was writing many years before, she was born in 1901, but the feelings. Goodness me, a book for my 30s. Now, the book that I wanted to pick was A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mystery, but I don't have a copy of that because I lent it to someone and never got it back. So we're standing in for it. We've got Family Matters by Rohinton Mystery, and I would say in my 30s, it was an odd decade for me because I had small children, so I didn't read as much because, sleep, exhaustion, trying to hold down a job and have little children. Yeah, hard work. But the books that I did read, I was kind of perhaps branching out more, and so this is a good example. A book for my 40s. That was easy because that was when I first properly read and enjoyed Middlemarch by George Eliot, and I think that's the perfect age to come to Middlemarch. And of course, I read all sorts of things in my 40s, but this is a good symbolic book for that age for me, of enjoying things in a different way because I was moving into middle age, as it were. I mean, obviously, I still feel extremely young, but still, technically, your 40s in middle age. Then a book for my 50s. Okay, so I had to choose a work in translation because one of the things that I've done more of in my 50s than any previous period of my life is reading books in translation. And again, could have chosen loads, but I've picked The Passion According to G.H. by Clarice Lispector because she's probably my current favourite writer, new favourite writer, if yeah, if you know what I mean. It's not like other writers are not still favourites like George Eliot, but she's she's a writer that I discovered in my 50s and joined the ranks of my favourites. Oh, this is a long tag, Mark. Question number 14. Of course, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but how do you feel when people say reading is boring? And what would you say in defence of reading? You know, I don't. If someone says reading is boring, if they're an adult, well, I feel sad. And I think what went wrong in your childhood and teens and young adulthood to turn you off the joy that there is in reading? But it's not that person's fault. That's something that's they've just not been as lucky as me in that they don't have the whole world or joy of reading in their lives. So any arguments that I give are just going to be, well, they're just going to sound patronizing or irritating. It's not going to make any difference, is it? So I wouldn't try and talk them into it. Like if it was a child, then I probably think, oh, what book can I buy for them that is going to set them on the right path? But yeah, so it's different if it's a child, isn't it? And question number 15 kind of links back to question number 1 because it's, what was the number 1 selling book on the day of your most recent birthday, fiction and or non-fiction? Now, actually, I found it a bit hard to find this because, I was looking for my actual birthday and the lists get updated, so it didn't seem to be there. I couldn't seem to find it exactly. I think that the non-fiction book that was number 1 in January of this year was Promised Land by Barack Obama, and I've no real interest, much as I might admire him as a person, to read that. The hardcover fiction top book, as far as I can make out, was something called The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. It means nothing to me. But possibly The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, which I did read and did enjoy. Yeah, I was slightly frustrated that I couldn't pin that one down properly. Anyway, this is very long because it's a really long tag with 15 long questions, but I've enjoyed doing it. So thank you, Mark, and thank you, Alan, for tagging me. And as I say, do it if you haven't done it yet, and if you'd like to, if it's got you thinking about your history in reading, as it were.